The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining in our webinar today, our practical approaches to mapping university contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. So this is a joint webinar between the SDSN Australia Pacific Network and ACTS, and we're really delighted to have you join us today. Just a couple of housekeeping notes to get things started. This session is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube shortly after the session concludes today. So just a heads up for anybody that is participating that it will be recording and you'll be able to review it again later at your leisure. A housekeeping note, you are able to interact with us and type out questions through the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you do have a question, please do type it in there. I will be monitoring that throughout the webinar. If you're having any technical issues, please do let me know and I'll try to sort them out with you. Alternatively, if you have any questions for our panelists throughout the session, please do type them through. There will be a section towards the end of the webinar where we'll be addressing any questions, time permitting, of course. So please do send them through. I think that's all I need to go through with you. All of the attendees are in mute mode, so we cannot hear you, but our presenters will be interacting with each other throughout the session. So to get things started, I will now hand over to Tal Keston, who is the SDSN Australia Pacific Network Manager, and she'll be moderating the session for you today.
Hello, everyone. As Rhiannon said, I'm Tal Keston. I'm the manager of the SDSN Australia Pacific, and I'm really excited to be here today to help present this seminar with ACTS around how universities can approach mapping what they do towards the SDGs. So before we start, I just wanted to quickly go over or introduce to you why we would even do something like that. And hopefully for many of you, it's obvious, but it's useful to remember why the SDGs are really important for universities. After that, we have a really great panel who will be talking about different approaches that they've taken to mapping and providing you with really useful guidance around what you can do. And as Rhiannon said at the end, there will be some time for questions. So firstly, why do the SDGs matter to universities? There's two really basic parts to that. Firstly, that as far as we can see, the SDGs can't be achieved without universities. It's a massive, complex agenda, and universities, through their role in research, education, leadership, have a role in helping the rest of the community develop the solutions, get the knowledge, and really build and train people who are able to deal with these complex issues. So the role of universities really comes down to every single SDG, to hunger, to poverty, to climate change. In every one of those areas, universities have a really key role, as well as to helping those in implementing the whole agenda, so advocating and helping other sectors. And obviously also the universities are generally very large institutions, and the SDGs are relevant to universities really within policies and operations. So there's a really large range of ways universities can contribute and really need to contribute. The other thing too is that universities really greatly benefit from engaging with the SDGs, and we know from the universities that we work with who have started that they're finding that the SDGs are a great way of communicating and demonstrating how the university contributes to the global impact. And for many of them, it's also about what they can do to strengthen this impact. And this is where mapping comes into it. So Mapping is really a first step in trying to engage more deeply with the SDGs. The first question many universities ask is, how are we already contributing and what areas of the university are important? So it's a really critical first step. And there's different reasons universities are doing this. It's partially to identify where there's strengths, gaps and opportunities for them to engage with the SDGs, identify who around the university they can engage with and bring on board, help explain what the SDGs are to staff and to students, and also around communication and promotion of what the university does. So it's a really useful step for that. But a lot of universities have looked at this, have found that it's a little bit complex and daunting. Universities can be huge. They do a lot of things and they can contribute to the university, to the SDGs in many different ways. So from conversations we've had within universities in our region, we've found that a few have already got the experience of doing it, and we're very happy to share it with others, which is what this webinar is all about. So I'll just quickly introduce you to the panel that we have. Firstly, we'll have Leah Dudley from Macquarie University, who will talk about how they did mapping within their own university, and then we will hear some other quite different approaches to it. So for now, I'll hand it over to Leah. Thank you.
Sorry, just a tiny delay while we hand over to Leah.
Thanks for that. I'm Leah Dudley. I'm a support officer at Macquarie University. There are three key areas that we have mapped against the SDGs. We've looked at institution-wide stated goals and objectives against the SDGs. Second, we've also approached it at the higher level, and we looked at the Macquarie University research in depth against the Australian Bureau of Statistics research codes. And this is still an ongoing project. Third, using the Learning and Teaching Sustainability Framework, we've completed in-depth mapping against the SDGs in this area. And this will be the main focus of today's presentation. We're also happy to continue answering questions regarding the mapping for the other two key areas I mentioned earlier, so feel free to write us some questions in the chat box. So the Macquarie University Sustainability Framework is based off the Learning and Teaching Framework that was developed in 2012, and this is underpinned by 5 overarching theories of learning skills. These pillars include harmony and well-being, economic and economic well-being, natural resources, climate change, and implementation and governance. Each of these have their own sub-themes that sit underneath them. Because this framework was developed before the UN SDGs were, we want to go back to the existing framework and see how it fits, so we can tweak it to see how it can better align with the SDGs. By doing this, it will create alignment with international standards, identify gaps in the Macquarie University framework, quantify Macquarie's contribution to the SDGs, create a basis for which Macquarie University can move forwards, and give students the relevant skills and information they can take into industry. To do the mapping, I spent a lot of time reading and understanding the core concepts and themes for both the definitions of the SDGs and the Macquarie University framework. Then I mapped each individual theme and the sub-themes onto the UN SDGs. For example, harmony and well-being is being mapped here, and on the left you can see the sub-themes that make up harmony and well-being on the left. So it's social justice, health, human rights, animal rights, cultural diversity, and these has been mapped onto each of the UN SDGs here. Each sub-theme either got a yes or a tick or a no, which is box to indicate if it was mapped. Considered a yes, the sub-theme had to reasonably align with the main definition and goal of the UN SDG. This method is somewhat, however, I feel that people will agree with the basis of rejection and acceptance that are, however, it is open to a degree of debate. Last, the percentage of each overarching framework pillar was calculated. So to calculate the amount harmony and well-being mapped onto, for example, no poverty. So this was done by counting up the total amount of sub-themes that aligned with it against the total amount of sub-themes used. For example, here 5 against the total 7. So that meant 60% of harmony and well-being sub-themes mapped onto the SDG of no poverty. So the outcomes of this mapping using the aforementioned strategy has been represented here in a heat map. So you've got the Macquarie University framework down the bottom on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you can see the UN SDGs. The heat map represents the extent to which each framework aligns with the UN SDGs, with green indicating a high proportion of the framework aligning, 75% or above, and yellow indicating a moderate level of alignment, so 41% to 74%. And red indicates a significant gap in alignment, so 0% to 40%. So some major gaps that have been highlighted are squared here in red, and they are quality education and gender equality, natural resources and climate change. Additionally, affordable and clean energy is also quite low against these two as well, and across the board, generally speaking. The same can be seen for decent work and economic growth, especially against natural resources. And we've found natural resources to be the most critical gap throughout, and this is also represented in the university curriculum as well. So there's been some recommendations made to amend these gaps, and a report is being created based on this, and it's being finalised now. Where changes are easy to make, such as updating definitions in our framework to include a broader range of the SDGs, has already been completed, and we're still in the process of amending the other gaps as well. So currently, as the next step, we're looking at starting the mapping again and redoing the alignment of the SDGs, where the SDGs are grouped into themes. So this feeds into a later question that I'll answer and build on later in the conversation. So I'll give it back to you now, Tal.
Thank you very much, Leah. Our next speaker is going to be Caitlin Leahy, who is soldiering on with the flu from the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology, Sydney.
Okay, thanks, Tal. As Tal mentioned, I'm not very well, so please bear with my my voice, but I'll do my best. So I'm Caitlin Leahy. I'm a research consultant at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology in Sydney. And so between August and October last year, at the Institute, we undertook a process of mapping our research work to the SDGs. And probably important to note that we're one institute within the wider university. So this example relates to a smaller scale than some of the other presentations today. There are a few motivations for doing this, stemming from our role on the SDSN Australia Pacific Executive Committee, our role leading the sustainability research area at the university, and our work in international development, which is one of our research strengths. We had the support of the Institute Director and another senior manager, and two of us, who are both researchers, led the process. So we were really interested to see where we currently aligned with the SDGs and the areas of strong, weak or no linkage to the framework. And this, we did this to help us externally in terms of communicating our work, but also internally to help us determine where we might go from there. Where are our areas of strength, our areas of weakness, to help us with internal planning. So the process we used was to engage the 10 research directors in our institute. So we have 10 different research areas, and we wanted them to map their current projects, the projects within their own research area, based on our assumption that they know best what the linkages are between the 17 goals and 169 targets and their own projects. So we developed this Excel mapping tool, and we could tailor it for each research area. You can see the tabs along the bottom represent the different areas of research. And we placed the current or recently completed projects for 2016 in the left-hand column. And then along the top, we put the 17 goals and their targets. And we found that we needed to map to the target level to make sure that people weren't making assumptions about what the goals actually referred to. You need to read down to the target level to understand what that goal is really about. So the different research directors worked across horizontally and put a 1 or a 0 to demonstrate a link between that project and that particular target. So then we collated the data and we played around with a few approaches to analysis, and we then presented the results internally through presentations at different meetings back to the research directors and more broadly. And we also presented it externally in a postcard format, and this is the main visual from that postcard. So we were able to identify the breadth and depth of our research linkages to the SDGs, and that was the main goal. One of the challenges was knowing that using this tool, we weren't able to determine the strength of a link. So it was either a link or no link. And in that sense, it's not as nuanced as it possibly could be. We kept it high level in order for it to be a manageable task. So our projects linked with every goal. The most linkages were found with goal 6 on water and sanitation, goal 9 on industry, innovation and infrastructure, and goal 12 on responsible consumption and production. And none of that was entirely surprising. Something really important that it showed was that all of our areas of research link with at least 5 different goals. And that was really important to demonstrate integration and the importance of integration between the goals. So it was nice to be able to present that back to our researchers to show how our work is linking in with each other. The collaborative approach, it also helped to achieve another objective, which was to socialise each research director to the goals. So it gave them an opportunity to get across the agenda and to think through how their work aligned. And it was helpful in the beginning because we were able to use it to get across some key messages, like the agenda is for every country, not just for developing countries. It's not just a follow-up to the MDGs, it's much bigger than that. All of our domestic work on sustainability is relevant to the goal, to the agenda. And most directors felt that it benefited them. The time that they put in was worth it because they were able to really engage with it. And a few of them have decided to use it in their planning processes for their own areas. We learned a lot from discussing with them as to how to improve the process and the tool along the way. And we hope to be able to use it to monitor our path to impact as an institution. So we're starting to use it as a framework to report against in terms of our research impact and contribution to creating change. So this mapping was a really crucial first step towards that and part of a longer process. And very happy to answer any questions on some more details about our process or anything else that you're curious about. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Caitlin. That was great. Our next presenter is Sue Pepper from Monash University and Monash Sustainable Development Institute, giving a very different kind of approach. Go for it, Sue.
Thank you, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the Monash University experience of mapping the Sustainable Development Goals. What I'm going to talk to you today is the area within the red circle, which is mapping keywords to produce a roadmap of researchers and research in the SDG space. So why was the mapping done? There are a number of questions asked around why we were doing this mapping, which came from the background of increasing our understanding of Monash in the SDG space, how we could raise the dialogue between researchers and between disciplines and faculties, how we could increase awareness in the space, promote our programs, and also creating a tool that could be used across the university. So very early on, I made an assumption that we could map the relationships between researchers and the SDGs. And how I did that was to connect an SDG keyword with a researcher. So for example, on the right-hand side there, you can see we have a researcher's name and they're connected with that particular keyword of sustainable water management. But that keyword also linked to a specific SDG. And of course, the researcher also linked with their home faculty, and that was centered around the university. So the first step was to develop a keyword list. And that was done against each of the against each of the SDGs. So for example, in SDG 2, we have this particular keyword of food security. The keyword list, excuse me, that I created was around 400 keywords. That has since been altered with input from the SDSN members, and a set of collated keywords has now been developed and will be available for distribution following the webinar. So step 2 was to link researchers with keywords. So that was done through self-identification on the Find a Researcher site, but the keyword was also searched in publication data and awards data. I used Node Excel to visualize those connections, and this page is just an example in a simple form. So a researcher, for example, Smith from the arts faculty, was also connected to the word food security. And so when that is graphed out, you can see all the connections laid out in a simple format. Now, when I did it for the keywords that I had, what I first got in Node Excel was a complete and utter shambles, and I had to try and make sense of that. What I did was to force the keywords into groups. So you'll see around the outside, there are each of the individual SDGs with their keywords located within a box. I've also forced the researchers into faculties. So you see here, this faculty here is business and economics, and you can see how they link to that faculty. But if you follow the links out, you'll see also how they link to the keywords. I've also weighted keywords. So the larger the blue dot of a keyword is the greater number of researcher connections. So a big dot means that there's a lot of researchers working in that field, whereas a small dot may not have any researchers connected to it. And in fact, I found that 40% of the keywords had no link to a researcher. I also transformed the data into dashboards so that very simply I can put in the code number for a particular faculty, and that will print out a list of all of the researchers in that space. There can be several hundred in that list, but also within the dashboard, I can enter a keyword and then I can find all of the researchers working or having identified as working in that space. The information from this mapping gave me the number of researchers identified as working in the space, the number of the researchers who are highly active in the space, and the disciplines where we are very research active, but also where our weaknesses are. The system was fed back to the faculties and they were able to identify errors such as people who have left, but also provide additional names because the faculty research managers know their researchers and the activities they take. I also had several problems. First being that this was manual screening. I've now developed an automated process and this appears to be working very well. I also had missed keywords, and the SDSN collated list has broadened that list considerably, so hopefully there aren't too many misses in the future work. The other limitation was that the extent of data that we used, so we used 3 years for awards and 1 year for publications, and that made things manageable, but that space could be increased. In the near future, we will be completing work that's been undertaken on field of research codes. We'll also be including community and social programs that our researchers undertake. Our teaching and learning space will be included. And we've also started to get requests now that people have seen the tool. They've asked how they can use it for KPI reporting. We've used it for delivering targeted communications. We've had requests for calculating research income related to the SDG space. And we'll also be using it for identifying researchers for interdisciplinary projects. So that's it, thank you, and I'll send back to Tal.
Thank you very much, Sue. The last panellist we have is Andrew Wilkes from the Sustainability Office at Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. Sorry, I should have said all the other ones were in Australia because we do have some international people joining us. So Andrew, are you ready?
Yeah. And big shout out to all the New Zealand folk that are in the audience too. A few of us here representing. Good to see you. So yeah, from a Victoria point of view, I guess first off, we've just, late last year, we established a new sustainability office for the university. I've been here for a number of years, but based out of campus services. And so the arrival of the Sustainable Development Goals dovetailed nicely with us setting up this new office. So the SDGs are a fairly core part of how we're trying to tackle sustainability at Vic. And so this particular thing that I'm going to talk about is how we went about mapping SDGs against our teaching content. So we developed this process of reviewing all the 3,000 plus courses that we've got on offer at Victoria, and to see how much of that teaching content was relevant to which of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so that's the reason we chose teaching is kind of the first cab off the rank is, one, it's a core activity at the university, but secondly, it's our biggest area of influence over students, which is probably our biggest contribution to a sustainable future. So, so why we chose to do the mapping process, as lots of the other presenters have said, it's around identifying strengths and weaknesses and what our current practices are. It was about identifying connections, and that's more so around connecting people, so identifying the course coordinator for each of the courses that have got content, and we can use that as a platform for network development. and it allows us, in terms of our reporting and monitoring, how much progress we're making on the teaching and embedding sustainability in the curriculum. We can benchmark against this baseline year and see, ideally, going forward, we'll get a bit more sustainability content into the curriculum. And then, as part of feeding on that, this snapshot of where we're at right now provides the opportunity for us to go out and discuss with academics around, what the SDGs are, how they're being incorporated into curriculum already, and how we might look to grow that through new curriculum offerings. So the process we went through, we outsourced. we engaged Paul Dowd, who was a lovely chap. He's a consultant with a background in web and marketing kind of work, but also a current master's student through our business school. So he came on board and worked up the technical side of the process. And so that kind of started out by identifying what all the data sources were, and who housed that information. So there's a lot of information out there around what gets taught in the courses, and ultimately the best source of information came down to our online course finder. And all of we're going through a process at the moment of expanding from a basic bit of information about the course to having the full course outline available online as part of that course finder. So that gave us the best source of information. So we took that information, and then as Sue did, we developed a list of keywords as well, and we searched it for each of the SDG goals, and align that to each of the courses that we're offering. So to streamline that process, we did an automated scrape, as is the jargon word that Paul used, of all the web content. And so we used a program called PassHub to do that, which basically sat and ran for 2 or 3 hours of scraping all the content off the website and spat out a report of when all the keywords got flagged. So we took that automated process, then we went through a bit of quality assurance assessing of that, basically to test the validity of the keywords. And so we went out to associate deans and a sample of academics that had been identified as course coordinators that were teaching this stuff, to basically throw our findings at them and say, hey, does this seem realistic? Are we identifying the right courses for the right goals? And are there any courses that we're missing where the keywords just haven't flagged the right content? And so then from there, we did a bit of analysis on the findings and put it into a little short paper, which is now being presented around the university, and is doing exactly what we want to, and starting the discussion. So then in terms of the outcomes of it, this is just a little snapshot of it. So we've got the goals across the top, and you'll note that there is an 18th column out the side around generic sustainability. That was one of the findings that we had in the keyword search, identified the need for a more generic terms for sustainability, as some of the courses taught sustainability in general but didn't have language that targeted each of the 17 specific goals. So we threw that one into the mix, and then you can see it's the rows are broken down by faculty and by school. And so I guess for us the pleasing result is that every goal of the 17 goals is covered by at least one course across the university, and secondly, every faculty and school has at least one course that is related to the Sustainable Development Goals. And across the board of the 3,000 odd courses, we've got about 11% of courses have relevant content to at least one of the goals. So where to from here? It's already triggered a bit of excitement in our web team and Student Academic Services team around reviewing the process for populating this course outlines and having an automated process to flag when there's SDG content in there. It started the dialogue about SDGs in general, and we're starting to ramp up the discussion on how we integrate sustainability content into teaching and what different vehicles we might use to push that further. And it's developed that list of staff that are active in teaching sustainability, and so we're using that as building up our network of professionals that are part of the new future. So that's about me. I'll hand it back to Tal.
Thank you very much, Andrew, and everyone else. It's really amazing to see the kind of work you've done and the impact it's having. I'm going to be using my moderator's prerogative and asking each of our presenters a question in follow-up, and then we'll open it up to audience questions if there are any. So firstly, Sue, if someone was starting this now, what advice would you give them about how to get started?
I think the advice that I would give them is to understand their own situation first. By that I mean, do they want to work at a high level, or do they want to delve more deeply into the research in the SDG space? If you want to sort of delve more deeply into the process and follow a method like I've used, then the advice that I would give is to ask Tal for the list of SDG keywords that was used, which is now common for Victoria University of Wellington, of University of Technology and Macquarie. And I think that's a really good starting space. And then to seek the support of your research office or business intelligence unit to try and automate the procedures for identifying those researchers who are working in the keywords.
Great, thanks very much. Leah, if you were starting over again, would you do anything differently?
Yeah, we've talked about this, and as I mentioned before at the end of my presentation, at the moment we're kind of looking at going maybe back to the beginning even and looking at redoing the alignment of the SDGs if they were grouped into themes against our framework. So, for example, there are some themes that have already been proposed by Lancaster University, and that's themed by economy, society and biosphere. Or another proposed grouping includes natural capital, governance, basic needs, empowerment and climate change, and that was proposed by the Modern Index Strategy Indexes. So we're thinking that using these themes would create more alignment with our framework, and it's a logical alignment because our framework is grouped as it is. And so it's expected that it would create a greater percentage of the Macquarie University Sustainability Framework to map onto the UN SDGs. Granted, perhaps the two themes that are posed already may not fit perfectly with our framework, but maybe a combination of the two. So that's what we're looking at redoing at the moment. So if we had to start again, probably looking at as Suzanne said, specifically what our situation is.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
Caitlin. Caitlin, you've used a methodology that relies a lot on other people providing you with information to self-identify how they contribute to the SDGs. Did you find that that it was easy to solicit that information? And if not, what did you do to encourage them to participate?
Yeah, so I guess this falls into the category of a task that is important but not essential in terms of people's everyday workloads. So we did have to think through how we would get people to give their time to this, particularly because they were research area directors, so they're very busy people. So we did a few things. We announced the initiative at internal staff meetings and also at research area directors meetings that are a bit more high level. It was clear that there was support from higher up in the organisation. We used a couple of the research directors as guinea pigs, and they helped us to sort of thrash out the tool and gave us tips about how to simplify it. We had to make sure it was as hassle-free for people to use, so we did as much background work ourselves as we could. For example, we generated the list of their projects to already put into the tool, and then they just had to work across and tick. But it was big because they have to essentially read 169 targets and decide whether it links to their work. So we offered a few different ways for them to do it. We offered to sit with them and explain it for at least one. I sat there and did it for them based on discussion with them. Yeah, we used email and just, I guess, based on our organisational culture, which is quite supportive, people were willing to be sort of tapped on the shoulder and reminded and all of that. But it did take a lot of work, and it was fairly resource intensive, but I think it was worth it in the end.
Thanks, Caitlin. And talking about resources, Andrew, I'm just wondering who can do this? What kind of expertise and resources do you need to take the approach that you took?
So we were very automated in our approach, I guess. So someone with that like we engaged Paul, and he had the knowledge of how to use the software systems to scrape the website and automatically extract that keyword data out of the course content. So someone that's got the know-how on how to do that is pretty good. But to wrap around that, there's also you need to have the relationship skills in the first place. One, to go out and talk to the people around the institution to find out who's got the best source of information for you, and around that quality assurance process as well, to be checking that what you've come up with is fair and reasonable. So you can't be entirely pointy-headed. You've got to have a bit of a balance there.
What about expertise in the actual SDGs and what they cover?
I think the content that we've got on the SDGs already, just on through SDSN or through the UN website itself, I think it explains what the SDGs are all about pretty well. You do really have to drill into those targets at the next level, not just the high level goal stuff, when you're thinking about developing the key words. But I wouldn't, like when Paul came into it, we didn't recruit him based on his knowledge of the SDGs. The SDGs was a new thing for him. So I wouldn't say you need a huge amount of background experience in SDGs to do it.
Okay, great. Now we will go to audience questions in a minute. So if anyone has a question to any of the presenters, please type them in now, and we'll have some time to answer them. Just before we do that, I wanted to just ask each of the presenters to maybe give us their final thoughts on advice they would give other people. So Sue, is there anything else you'd like to add now that you've heard everyone else?
Advice. I think from my point of view, the advice would be to work very closely with the faculties, because the information that I can get through our business intelligence is quite good, but I really picked up a lot of extra names and a lot of extra expertise and even some extra keywords that I should have been looking for by working closely with the faculties.
Great, thank you. What about you, Leah?
I think perhaps the only advice I give is really taking the time to fully understand what definitions and themes are within the university sustainability frameworks, goals, strategic objectives, and also really taking the time to fully understand the UN SDGs. And I think investing in that time for me personally made all the difference. So I think just really getting to know it would be my advice.
That's very good advice. Caitlin.
Yeah, I think having dual objectives of mapping activities and research and teaching, but also socialising the goals and the 2030 agenda is really valid. It can mean it's a bit more time consuming, possibly resource intensive, and you're chasing people, but I think that's really important. But having said that, be really aware of the scale of what you're doing, because we were looking at one institute within a university, and we'd really, in conversations about doing it with the broader university, we're thinking really carefully about what tools to use. So scale is really important.
Great, thank you. And Andrew, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, I guess just picking up on that point around the scale, and that if you do dive into a mapping exercise in detail, it can be very time consuming. So try and design your process to be as efficient as possible. And then as a follow-up on that, I guess, so if it's an efficient process, but also a repeatable process, because all of the examples that you've heard today are all one-off snapshots of where the institution is at a point in time, and ideally we want to be tracking progress. So if you've designed your process that's a cumbersome, time-consuming, difficult thing to deliver, you're unlikely to repeat that again, and the process is an ongoing thing. So yeah, that's the thing. Make it as efficient as possible so that you can repeat it again and again. And when I say again and again, I mean once a year or every 2 years or something like that. That's
Great,
me.
thank you. Thanks very much, Andrew and everyone. I'm going to pass it on to Rhiannon now to pass on some questions from the audience.
Thanks, Tal. I'm just going through in order that the questions have come through. So the first one's from Andrea, and she's asked, under SDG 7, improving quality of data and monitoring and promoting multi-stakeholder partnerships are key. Can any of the panellists comment on what their institutions are doing in this space? So open to any of our panellists to have a go at this one.
I'll chip in. I think for, not just for SDG 7, but for all of the SDGs, they lend themselves a lot to collaboration, and I guess it's really good for a university context, and that lots of those the responses to those goals require an interdisciplinary approach. So one of the things that we did last year around trying to promote the SDGs, or using the SDGs as a tool for promoting sustainability at Vic internally, was around having an ideation forum which brought together about 60 or so academics and a few external invited guests to come together to essentially brainstorm ideas for new research topics that had to be interdisciplinary and collaborative and based around the SDG framework, which has generated some new research projects which are being delivered as we speak.
Thanks, Andrew.
Anyone everyone else.
If none of the other panelists have a comment to make on that one, there is another direct question for you, Andrew. It's just a quick one. What is the app/software you use to gather keywords from websites? Are you able to answer that? Because it was a consultant.
So, Pass Hub was the software we use. So that was it's a subscription-based thing. So it's PARSE and then HUB, Pass Hub. I think it was about $100 a month or something like that to subscribe to it for the duration that we did. So that's the automated thing.
Great, thanks. And that question came from Dina. So again, if the first question didn't have any further comments, I'll move on because we do have a few that have come through now. The next one comes from Shane, and he's asked, if university departments and institutes want to get involved and align their specific work with the SDGs, how can we work with MSDI on this?
Well, I guess that question's coming to me. If we're talking about MSDI, I'm happy to continue offline conversations with people who'd like to understand what I've done and how that we worked with the faculties and the broader university, and even how we intend to bring in our industry and other stakeholders. Is that enough of an answer for this particular point?
Yes, Shane said thanks, and he'll contact you offline.
Yeah, I'm very happy to speak with anybody who'd like to learn about the process of working with Node Excel, or Gephi as a good alternative. And if anybody does, I'm happy to hear from them and chat with them offline.
Great, thank you, Sue. The next question comes from Jenny, and she's asked, what lessons or approaches from other sectors did the presenters/universities draw from or apply their approaches to mapping, for example, from government, private or civil society sectors? So again, open to all panelists.
Well, short answer from Vic is that we didn't really. We just kind of made it up on the fly.
Thanks, Andrew.
Yeah, I might add to that. I think when we started it, we weren't aware of a lot of other examples of processes and tools that were being used. So we did sort of make it up, and I think that's why it's really important to have these sorts of forums so we can share with each other about the different challenges and opportunities for universities. But I think it is really important to also take into account other sectors and how they've done it.
But this might be an opportunity for you to do a bit of a pre-sales pitch on the university guide.
I will a bit later. Don't worry.
I think the only other thing I'd like to add to those last comments is that individually we've all come up with quite unique ways of obtaining the outcome that we've wanted. And I guess as other people who haven't yet started this process start to think about how they might do it, I think that they've got 4 really good examples that they can fall back on, and you know, depending on how deep they want to go, that they can then approach those universities for assistance in how to get started.
Great, thank you, Sue. I think we've got time for one last question. So this one comes from Puck, who also says, thank you all for sharing your wisdom and experiences. The emphasis in your presentations was on mapping the teaching/research content against the SDGs. What about the operational areas of the university, for example, waste, energy, etc.? Should or could this be mapped to, and what is being done by any of you?
Well, certainly from an MSDI point of view and looking at Monash broadly, it is something that we intend to do, and that would be included in that, you know, that social interaction that we have with the world. So yes, we do intend to include it as a priority. It is not the highest priority for us yet.
For Vic, we've started doing a bit of work on the operational side. It's less of a process of keyword searching, because it's not like there's such a database of that you can turn to search through. So it's more a case of just knowing the different initiatives and projects that are underway across the university, from everything from student experience to waste management and that sort of stuff. And so we have got a little bit of a framework lined up where we're sort of plotting all of those activities against the SDG goals and which ones they contribute to. And that will feed through into our sustainability reporting framework.
I haven't heard all of the answers just because it's cutting out a bit, but currently Macquarie University is not mapping against operations, but that doesn't mean other universities couldn't map their operations, recycling and waste against SDGs. Just to begin with, we thought it would have a greater impact to focus on the students, engaging with them and giving them the skills they need to go into industry, being sustainability minded. Thanks, Tal.
Okay, so thank you very much. If there are any other questions, please, you can send them to me or to, I guess, anyone else who's involved. But we'll be, if there are both the keywords that Sue mentioned, we will be putting out something that summarises them and hopefully will help others have something to start with that's been tried and tested by a few different universities. But as Andrew mentioned, universities are quite different from other types of organisations, from businesses and civil society, NGOs, and even government. They're very large and they have very many different functions. And to recognise that their relationship to the SDGs can be quite different from other organisations, and that their needs and how they would go about it is quite different. Together with ACTS, SDSN Australia Pacific is working on a guide for universities on getting started, and we're hoping to have that ready in the next few months. As well as, if people are interested, the ACTS annual conference is actually themed around the Sustainable Development Goals, and you can go to both of our websites to hear a bit more or to find out more about what we do and how you can engage in the goals. We hope this has been a useful webinar, and yes, if you have any comments or questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tal. We'll just wrap up the session now. So just want to say a big thank you to all of our presenters and for Tal for coming online today. It's been really informative, and we hope that all of our attendees that have joined in from Australia and New Zealand, and we've also had quite a few from outside internationally, we hope you've got something out of it. So I'll wrap it up now. Thank you very much.